You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've wrapped the first day of the E. Jean Carroll trial. Were there any moments that signaled how this case would go for Trump?
Well, so reportedly, E. Jean Carroll's testimony has been blockbuster. It's been dramatic. Based on the accounts we're hearing coming out of the courtroom, it has been entirely credible and believable. Now, of course, credibility is in the eyes of the jurors, so we'll have to wait to see how they receive it. But I don't think it's necessarily the facts and the evidence that are hurting Trump at the moment. Is some of his not at all surprising reckless posts, threatening posts, fraudulent posts that are making an entrance in the court in ways that seem to be really upsetting and angering the presiding judge.
Now, I guess what impact are these posts actually having materially on this case? Like, I know that we always say, there are a lot of people who say like that when he does these posts that it can hurt him in the end, but is that actually bearing out in this case?
It's an interesting question. It will hurt him in the case itself if the judge ends up ruling that any of these, reckless posts, these threatening posts that he's making in real time while the trial is ongoing, if they are admissible before the jury for any purpose. And I don't think the judge has crossed that bridge yet. But what the judge has said, Brian, are things like to the defense attorney, you know what, you might want to talk with your client because he may be exposing himself to additional liability. Now, the judge didn't define what he meant by additional liability. But then in another point during the trial day, the judge said, you might want to talk to your client because there are additional federal statutes that might come into play. I have a feeling, Brian, I know what the judge was talking about there, because as Trump is posting these intimidating, threatening, and fraudulent posts about E. Jean Carroll, a federal statute came to mind for me, and it is 18 United States Code Section 1512, tampering with a witness, victim, or informant. And real briefly, here's how that law reads. Whoever knowingly uses intimidation, threatens, or corruptly persuades another person or attempts to do so with the intent to influence, delay, or prevent the testimony of a person in an official proceeding, which is precisely what Donald Trump is doing, that person is guilty of witness tampering, and it carries up to 20 years in prison. I think that's what the judge was referring to.
Now, what does Trump risk here beyond, of course, that specific instance? Like, if he loses this case, what's the range of what the punishment could be?
So he won't be punished other than financially. And E. Jean Carroll will go about, her attorneys will go about proving what her damages are, what her pain and suffering has been, what her emotional distress has been, what her earning capacity is or was, and how that has been damaged as a result of what Trump did to her, not only back in the 90s, but more recently when he lied about her, he defamed her. I mean, to have the president of the United States use his bully pulpit and then again, after he leaves office, continue to defame a victim of somebody he is alleged to have assaulted, you can imagine what kind of damage that inflicts on the victim.
Now, you mentioned that the only punishments would be financial. I'm assuming that's because this is a civil case. With that said, could he also be retried for the same crime criminally?
No, I think the crimes have now sort of passed the statute of limitations. So
Yeah.
I don't expect you will see a criminal prosecution for what he did to E. Jean Carroll. But I'm telling you, the dark horse criminal possibility here is his witness tampering that he seems completely comfortable doing as this very trial is ongoing.
Which is ironic because all he has to do is shut up and he'll actually be in a better situation than if he just keeps talking. And yet, that's something we've come to expect from Donald Trump. He hasn't been present in the courtroom thus far. How could a defendant make his case without actually being there?
He can make his case through counsel, but how persuasively can he make his case when the jury sees an empty chair for the person on trial in the civil defamation suit? Now, the jury will be instructed that in a civil case, a defendant or a respondent is not required to be present throughout the course of the trial if the judge permits him to be absent. But it sends an unmistakable signal that, how much does Donald Trump care about not only what he did to E. Jean Carroll, But, what the result of this trial may be, it's not a good look for a defendant.
Have you seen in the past that there's a higher likelihood of juries to basically side with the prosecution if the defendant doesn't bother showing up to defend himself?
So, there is no prosecution when it's a civil case. These are civil lawyers
Or
basically fighting
plaintiffs, I
over.
guess.
What's that?
The plaintiff, I guess.
The plaintiff, right? I can't speak to statistics, but what I will say is, it's just not a bad look if you think the person being sued, the person who allegedly sexually assaulted the complainant, the person who then defamed the complainant, lied about her, tried to bully her, harass her, threaten her, and intimidate her, doesn't really care enough to even show up for his own trial. Again, I have to believe, even if the judge instructs the jury, don't hold that against him. The jurors are human beings, and they're going to absorb something from Donald Trump's absence.
Glenn, this is a question that I'm sure you get a lot. It's a question that I get a lot. So I might as well ask, will a guilty verdict in this case impact Trump's ability to run for office?
Unfortunately, it will not. If he is found liable for causing the damage to E. Jean Carroll, what will he likely do? He'll use it as a fundraising vehicle because, that's the kind of thing that many of his supporters seem to encourage and cheer on and celebrate, the mistreatment of women and him telling lies about it. It will not impede him at all legally. Will it impede him politically? Well, only, the voters can answer that question.
To that point, I guess my last question here is, in a human sense, what does it say that the leading contender for the Republican Party, the party of family values, is currently on trial in a defamation case with his alleged rape victim?
It's not only this case, but it's all of the misdeeds of Donald Trump, some civil, many criminal, that have gone unaddressed, unpunished. And unfortunately, the institutions of government don't seem to be up to the task or the urgency of the moment to put a stop to it. Instead, they're letting somebody who, I don't know, attempted to overthrow our democracy, attempted to negate the expressed will of the American voters. He is being allowed to run for president unencumbered by the criminal law. That, to me, is beyond perplexing.
I did ask before about how this case in particular might impact his ability to run for office. Obviously, it wouldn't. Are there any cases that he's contending with right now, from the DOJ to Fulton County to Manhattan or even New York, that would impact his ability to run for office?
I think practically, those prosecutions could impact his ability to run for office, particularly the federal charges that are in the offing. Now, specifically, if he is charged with a crime like treason or insurrection, those crimes carry with them the possible statutory punishment of prohibiting somebody from holding office in the future. And I believe those are the only two, treason and insurrection. So it could be that if the federal charges really do start to ramp up, if he's indicted, if he's hauled into court, if he has to defend against what he did, particularly on January 6th, that could actually end up in a legal prohibition from having him ever serve in public office in the future.
And this is just a political question here, so I'm just looking for your opinion on this one. We'll end with this. Do you think that the baggage that he carries by virtue of being a criminal defendant, possibly in a handful of cases, actually hurts his ability to run for office? And so it would be better to just have such a weakened Donald Trump run for office, as opposed to barring him from running for office as a result of these cases?
Some say that, some make a political calculation, but, it's so unseemly. It's so unsettling, I think, for our nation to have somebody like that even running for office, even if it does up the likelihood that he will lose. It's just very hard to accept that, let's just make all of these calculations based on politics, not law, not morality, not on decency.
Yeah.
But can I throw the question back to you, the same question about, the political implications?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is something I've gone back and forth with, because just this week we saw polling that actually Donald Trump fares worse against Joe Biden than someone like Ron DeSantis does. Of course, right now it doesn't look like Ron DeSantis will be able to get out of a primary against Donald Trump, so that doesn't seem to be a problem at this point. But yeah, I mean, it's, it's a consideration, I guess, that if you have someone like Donald Trump, who even before he was contending with all this legal liability, had already shown that he wasn't able to beat someone like Joe Biden in the 2020 election. I mean, just to imagine what it would look like in 2024 when the guy is not only a proven loser back in 2020, but now contending with indictments in Manhattan, but then also possibly in Fulton County at the DOJ for the Mar-a-Lago stolen classified documents case, for the January 6th case, the New York AG's case. I mean, there has to come a point when people out there, even those people who are soft Republican voters or independents, look at that and say, like, man, that's just, I cannot see myself casting a ballot for someone who's done what Donald Trump has done. So I don't think it's going to redound to his benefit at all. But with that said, I think I'm in the same camp as you, where if we have the opportunity, by virtue of the justice system actually doing its job and preventing him from running, if that's what one of the charges calls for, then you just do what you got to do and follow the law here. And if that means that he's not able to run, then that means that he's not able to run. So with that said, Glenn, thank you for your insight. Obviously, we'll continue to keep on top of these cases and more. So for anybody watching, if you want to stay on top of this legal news, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.